How do you use that incredibly rich understanding of customer behaviour to affect the roles that you have?
Well, I'm very conscious of the opening presentation today from the Information Commissioner's Office, so let me caveat that. So on the one hand, you'll just get a massive data dump and someone says, here's our insight, and it's kind of, no, that's just a load of information.
For me, insight is rare and it's hard won, and it's well described as being this profound and useful understanding. It's profound because it answers the question, so what?
Actually, what the business needs is just some pretty useful stuff that can start to move the needle.
Petrol heads, and I guess we'll have to call them some electron heads as well, are significantly overrepresented in the motor industry. Do you have, in your many roles in different motor manufacturers, have you found that to be a help or a hindrance in your leadership role?
That insight isn't actionable.
Well, hello and welcome. I'm your host, Sam Knowles, and welcome to this very special episode of Data Malarkey, the podcast about using data smarter. We're recording live on stage at the DataComms 2025 conference at the Mayfair Hotel at the heart of Mayfair's fashionable London. Let's have a big data from the audience. Thank you very much, audience. Thank you so much to DataComms impresario Andrew Thomas for introducing us and for having us, and for your kind words of introduction. You are not only the godfather, you're the father, the progenitor of this idea of bringing this live. Joining us today, as Andrew said, is Nick Ratcliffe, who I think I'm right in saying is the Customer Experience Director of Volkswagen Group UK. Nick runs the contact centre, customer database, marketing technology stack, customer insights for Volkswagen UK. That means running those four roles for VW passenger vehicles, commercial, Audi, Seat, Cupra and Skoda. The company accounts for more than a fifth of all new cars sold in the UK, sold and serviced through more than 600 franchise retailers. And the sheer scale of the business makes it, Nick believes, the biggest payer of VAT in the UK. Now, when we first met, Nick described his title of Customer Experience Director as a bit of a misnomer. What it does mean is that quite often customers of the 6-car marks will get in touch with him on LinkedIn and say, my wipers aren't working. But in fact, Nick and his team spend most of their time making smarter use of data and sourcing genuine insights to do two things. The first is to make the company ever more customer-centric, and the second is to ease the transformation facing the industry over the next 10 to 15 years as it moves from the internal combustion engine to an industry that will be 100% electric. Now, Nick's CV reads like a copy of Autocar, if you will, with a string of senior marketing roles at VW, Audi, JLR, Mercedes-Benz, Citroën, BMW, as well as 6 years at BT, where he was marketing director of BT Business. Nick's also a lifelong supporter of Liverpool Football Club, basking in the satisfaction of a record-equalling 20th top flight title this season and ignoring the post-season friendlies happening down on the south coast last night. We really appreciate your making the time to join us here today, Nick. It's great to have you with us. And so welcome to Data Malarkey, live on stage at DataComms.
Great to be here.
Now, I trust that was a decent summary of who you are and what you do. Is there anything you'd like to add? Anything I've got wrong?
I suppose not many of the listeners will kind of get a clear grasp of what 22% share of the new car market looks like, but it's about 500,000 new cars on the road each year. So we've got about 6 million customers out there, probably some in the room here, and an addressable customer database of just shy of 8 million customers.
Big data sets, proper big data sets. Now, before we focus on data and insight, I want to start with a question that's designed to get to the heart of what makes you, you. And it doesn't necessarily ask you to tell us about the 9 to 5. So tell me, if you would, Nick, how do you spend your time?
How do I spend my time? Other than being at work, I am a less than talented but very enthusiastic guitar player, and have progressively made the transition from wannabe rock star to not really getting my head around flamenco. I do a slightly obscure martial art called Aikido, and I've just decided that fly fishing is going to be my old man's hobby. So I'm failing to catch fish quite regularly at the weekends.
Very good. I sense that all of those will have some kind of data angle, because When we first met, when we started talking about this, I was really intrigued on your LinkedIn profile that you attribute your enthusiasm for evidence-based marketing science and behavioural economics to your original degree in molecular biology. So can you tell us a bit about how you've applied your scientific brain to your marketing career?
I suppose it's just that sense of curiosity of kind of how does this work from first principles, and so trying to get into the hydraulics of a business and a business problem and understanding how different things interrelate and being able to quantify that. But also, I'm not a physicist, I'm a biologist, so the kind of human elements to it as well. So understanding human behaviour, but liking to be able to quantify what's going on. I suppose. So when I was in marketing roles, I was quite an early adopter of econometrics and media mix analysis. And I suppose one story that brings that to life is at one point my sales director colleague came along and said, we've got to sell a lot more Audi A3s next quarter. So can you run more of that £299 a month tactical advertising? And I said, no, we're going to put the R8 on television, because we'd done the modelling that said the best driver of order take in the organisation is brand desirability, and the best driver of brand desirability is the R8, and if we can give that the highest exposure possible, we'll get a bump in brand desirability, and that will drive your sales far more than bottom of the funnel tactical conversion.
And you followed that path, and
that's what worked. Yeah.
Very good indeed. Now, listen, I was intrigued in an earlier session at DataComms. First off, Stephen Waddington talking rather hair-shirtedly about companies' hypothesis proving rather than hypothesis testing, looking for the data that's going to prove the case or to build the story. I was very, very pleased to hear that standing up for hypothesis testing. The word insight, I think it's fair to say, is thrown about by many in marketing like confetti. For me, insight is rare and it's hard won, and it's well described as being this profound and useful understanding. It's profound because it answers the question, so what? This is what the data mean. Your example there, excellent example from the R8 for the TT. But allowing us to go on and look at the much more interesting question, now what? This is what we should do as a result. In your career in telecoms, but obviously mostly in automotive, have you got frustrated by what's often presented as insight? Question one. And then question two, how do you get your teams to get to genuinely actionable insights about your North Star, which is obviously your customers?
Yeah, I think you're right. Insight's one of those, bit like strategy, it's one of those overused words that's just appended to something to try and give it some credibility. And it seems to be overused at both ends of the telescope. So on the one hand, you'll just get a massive data dump and someone says, here's our insight. And it's kind of, no, that's just a load of information. Where's the insight? To the other end, where people at the operational end of the business are saying, that insight isn't actionable. And I think what they mean really is, you haven't told me exactly what to do. And it's kind of somewhere in the middle, the real insight list, which I suppose is, it needs to be truthful, it needs to be new, and you need to be able to use it. So there's no point having some incredible insight that you can't act on. But I think it's kind of, at what point does the data and insight team need to hand things over and say, look, we've identified a potential solution here, but it's over to you guys in the operational parts of the business to actually work out what conversation are you going to have with that particular retailer. We don't need to do the whole job for them.
Often there can be a lost in translation kind of moment, or indeed kind of culture that exists between those that are knee deep in data and insight and analytics and maybe traditionally marketing, working across all of those different domains that you have at VW across the 6 marks. Is there anything in particular, any way of leading in particular that you work to stop those lost in translation?
Yeah, I think when I took over this team, it's just over 5 years ago now, talking to the internal customers, quite a lot of the feedback was, your team are doing some really interesting stuff, but we're not really sure why. And I think there was that disconnect between recognised business need and what the data analytics team were actually doing. And there was some of it was lost in translation, some of it was genuine hobby horse following from the data team, doing what they could rather than what was needed. So yeah, I think a lot of it was ensuring that my team were getting really much more into the weeds of what the operational teams were looking for, and taking people on a journey step by step. Often stuff that was being taken for granted was actually where the value was lying, and people were trying to get into, oh yeah, but cutting edge, new tool, exciting magpie type behaviour, rather than saying actually what the business needs is just some pretty useful stuff that can start to move the needle.
Reining in that the inner Doug, the dog from the Pixar movie Up. Squirrel. Very important to be doing that. I want to focus on data a bit. I think I'm right in saying that the gold standard for the motor industry data used to be the new car owners survey. Could you tell us a little bit about how you and your teams use, say, the DVLA car ownership data to enrich your customer data so that you can understand behaviour better?
Yeah, so I suppose one of the fundamental questions in the business is what's our loyalty rate? And the new car buyers survey is a big, used to be postal, now it's online, but it's a sampled survey. It's updated twice a year, and it used to be the kind of origin of what was called the loyalty metric. But what that survey was asking people who've bought a new car, what did you previously drive? And that gives you one view. But we wanted a fully comprehensive view now. So one of the benefits of working in our sector is we do know the name and address of pretty much every one of our customers. And what we're able to do is match that data with the DVLA data, who provide a feed on a regular basis of everyone who sold their vehicle. So rather than just looking at the purchases and where did they come from, we actually can look at the customer base and go, okay, where have they gone? So some people sell a car and don't buy another one. Some people have a used car and buy a new car. Some people have a new car and buy a used car. Some people buy a new car and buy another new car. And we can therefore track that. And that's become effectively the standard customer metric within our business in terms of how many of our customers are buying either within the same brand or another group brand. And so a huge amount of work has been done in terms of looking at every touch point and understanding what influence that is having on that loyalty metric. And obviously, being able to do it on the basis of real customer numbers rather than a sample survey, which is a huge approximation.
Not the fool's gold, but what everybody wants is to be able to predict what people are going to do next. And when we first met, I think you said to me, if you've bought 2 Golfs, you're very likely to buy a third. Can you explain a little bit about how you use data to do genuinely predictive analytics at VW?
Yeah, so that's a sound bite that was kind of used within the retail networks to kind of actually convince them that they need to be looking after their existing customers rather than just going out looking for new customers all the time. And I think it's less true than it used to be, but certainly the data would say that once you've got somebody into their second vehicle within a brand, the propensity to buy again goes up dramatically. Things are changing quite a lot. So with a shift to electrification, that's changing buyer behaviour. There are, I think now, over 60 new car brands in the UK. I think if we wound the clock back 10 years, it would be under 40. So it's a much more competitive environment. And so there's quite a lot going on that is changing those models. But from that basic loyalty data, we've effectively got a series of models in terms of how likely is this customer to stay with us? How likely is this customer to buy? Or what vehicle are they likely to buy if they do stay? And when are they likely to buy that vehicle? And it also leads into, do we expect that customer to carry on in the vehicle they're in? And therefore, at the end of 3 years, do we need to be talking to them about extending a warranty and a service plan? or do we expect them to be changing their car and therefore we should be talking to them about what their next car should be?
But that will absolutely tailor the communication that goes out to individuals and to groups and to your entire...
Oh yeah, this is all about individual communication, trying to make it as relevant as possible to that individual customer's circumstances, and constantly adding new data sets and new data feeds just to refine that predictive understanding of what that customer's going to do and minimise the chance of losing them.
Hello there, it's your host Sam here. Well, if you've been inspired by this conversation and want to find out what type of data storyteller you are, why not visit our scorecard at data-storytelling.scoreapp.com, complete 12 simple questions, and you'll instantly be served with a report telling you what type of data storyteller you are. Now, back to the action.
Now listen, many of your models create deep and intense loyalty with your customers, and I'm thinking you mentioned the Audi TT in the context of the R8. What do you do when you've spent several decades building and growing loyalty like that to the TT, and then the business decides not to make a new model because it couldn't carry a battery with a long enough range because the car's too small? How do you face that type of challenge?
Again, it's just another iteration of that same principle in terms of what do we understand about these customers, why have they bought what they've bought, and what are they likely to do next. So when the TT first arrived, it brought a huge number of new people to Audi because it was a game-changing model. And with a model like that, you will have a mix of people who are buying it because of its form and function, but increasingly, I think, as the TT went through 3 life cycles, it became more of a people who are buying it because it's an Audi. So it's then a case of saying, okay, what are the drivers and what can we do about this people? The drivers are the decision, and what can we do about it? So trying to identify if they bought it because it's an Audi, because it's sporty, because it's compact, then let's talk to them about something like an Audi S3. And that challenge of nameplates disappearing off the roster is going to increase as the industry moves from internal combustion engine vehicles to internal combustion engine to electric vehicles. We're going to be increasingly trying to manage that transition and, again, predict which customers are most likely to move to an EV sooner than others. So again, the propensity model is now taking the other data sets. So one of the key ones is if you've been through the process of thinking, could I have an EV? A lot of it depends on whether you can charge that vehicle at home. So do you have a driveway? So we've got a data set. It's a fairly binary question. Does the household have a driveway or not? That will have a 6 percentage point impact on the propensity of a customer to buy an ID3 versus buying a Golf. So it's rolling that in and then starting to effectively, predict EV propensity.
I know there's an awful lot talked about our decision making, the work of Daniel Kahneman and others in terms of making decisions emotionally, justifying them rationally, and so on. I want to talk a little bit more about that in the context of electric vehicles. And I know that your data shows that moving from internal combustion engines to EVs is not like moving from one car mark to the other. It's like a whole shift I think you described a whole shift in operating system that makes decision making more conscious, more rational, more deliberative, more system one versus system
exactly.
two. Does that shift that everyone's going to have to make mean that the mental shortcut of brands and brandings is less important, or is going to have to change?
I don't think it has to change, but it's definitely having less impact on that. So, the traditional car buying model is that everyone's walking around with a kind of mental shortlist of vehicles and brands that they could potentially see themselves in. And the marketing effort was really about trying to latch onto that and drive somebody through that shortlisting process. Moving to an EV, there are far more considerations to be made. I've just talked about one, which is charging. And can it work in terms of my lifestyle? So it becomes a far more deliberate, cognitive process, more steps, more jobs to be done. And it's adding more friction, and therefore that sort of mental shortcut of these are the brands that are on my radar is disrupted. And we've seen some of the traditional divisions in the market, mass market brands, premium brands, that's being broken. So that, we've seen people buying the Skoda Enyaq coming in from Mercedes, coming in from BMW, coming across from Audi, from our own portfolio. Because people are looking at the products in their own right and being less driven by that sort of previously established, these are the sort of brands I work with.
Let alone the role of range anxiety, which soon passes. But I'm intrigued that I'm not aware in this country or elsewhere any campaigns that have addressed the emotional aspect of range anxiety that new EV drivers often have.
Yeah, although again the insight we have now is range anxiety is less of an issue. It's now charge point availability anxiety. And overlaying that, a much greater concern amongst female drivers around public charging and the risks to them and their family around running out of charge. It's a massive sort of gender divide in terms of propensity.
Now, modern connected vehicles collect and share with the manufacturers so much behavioural data. You know what your customers are doing. How do you use that incredibly rich understanding of customer behaviour to affect the roles that you have?
Well, I'm very conscious of the opening presentation today from the Information Commissioner's Office. So let me caveat that, yeah, clearly there's a lot of data there and it's used very carefully with the customer's consent. Most of it's aggregated data, but there are cases where it's useful for us to understand individual behaviours. So let's imagine we've got two customers, so they live next door to each other. So from a geodemographic perspective, they look identical. They may drive exactly the same car. Historically, we'd have treated them the same. If we know from the connected car data that one has a 15-minute commute and one drives 1,000 miles a week, we will treat them differently in terms of EV propensity. So we're very interested in the routes. What we're not really interested in is where they go. And that's the point at which it probably gets into uncomfortable territory from a privacy point of view, and that's where we won't go.
Understood. Now, I know that petrol heads, and I guess we'll have to call them some electron heads as well, are significantly overrepresented in the motor industry. Do you have, in your many roles in different motor manufacturers, have you found that to be a help or a hindrance in your leadership role?
Well, I'm not a petrol head, and I've kind of prided myself on not being a petrol head. So I think, if you're in engineering and you're in design, then you have to be a car enthusiast. I think the risk in our industry is that in the sales and marketing area, if everyone's a car enthusiast, there's a tendency to assume that all the customers are. And about 10% of them are. And of the rest, you've got a split between people who are what I would see as kind of, maybe I'm biased in the way that I see this as normal behaviour, but a car is an important part of their identity, a high value purchase, something they take a lot of consideration over, and the other half are, it's a box on wheels and I don't really care. But we need to make sure that our communications and our sales processes work for the 90% of people who aren't petrol heads. So I sort of pride myself on trying to be the voice of the customer in the room, rather than assuming that everyone's massively interested in horsepower and limited slip differentials, whatever they are.
Now, I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience shortly, but before I do that, I want to ask you, what's the worst example of a misuse of data that you've witnessed during your career? And I sense, having spoken to you before, that there might be a starring role for the customer satisfaction survey in your industry.
Well, yeah, most businesses, we have a customer satisfaction survey, and it's a very important metric to understand what our customers think about what's going on in their experience, particularly in the retail environment. And historically, to try and improve that performance, the business and the industry has really got into a habit of providing a financial incentive to a retailer to improve that score. What's happened over the years, although it's calming down now, but certainly there was a peak of it a few decades back, where perhaps 10, 15, even 25% of the retailer's return on sales was going to be based on their customer satisfaction score. Now, that's certainly going to get their attention, but it also focuses the attention on the score, not the purpose of having a survey. So what's happened is the whole cottage industry grew up around managing the score. So I inherited a team which had a person whose job it was to deal with the appeals from retailers saying that survey shouldn't be counted in my score because of mitigating circumstances A, B, and C. And it's like, no, we're not doing that anymore. It's a level playing field. It's about what are the customers telling us. So it's led to unhelpful staff incentive programs, disciplinary action on staff. I'm sure people listening and in the audience have probably been encouraged by their retailer to give them 5 stars out of 5. Otherwise, I won't get my commission, blah, blah, blah. So the scores we're getting are not necessarily representative of the actual experience because customers are being coached. So what we're piloting with one of the brands in the group is to use text analytics of the verbatim comments and saying, okay, the score that the customer's given is the starting point, but we will then moderate that score on the basis of what the customer said. So if they talk about, yeah, I've given you 5 stars, but so-and-so didn't happen, then that score needs to be reduced. If they call out an individual for particular praise or a particular process that went particularly well, then that score is moderated. And we're getting much more of a normal distribution curve, which makes the whole thing actionable. Whereas at the moment, the dispersion across retailers is so skewed to perfect that it's very difficult to get any learnings from what customers are telling us. But it's in the verbatims. Historically, that's been just shared for information. Now we're able to analyse it and quantify it, and it's having the desired effect in terms of getting people to refocus on what customers are telling us, what we're learning from that, rather than just chasing a number to hit an incentive target.
A couple of other quick things. One is Netpromoter relevant in your trade? And secondly, how influential are influencers?
We don't use NPS as a specific metric, but there's a huge focus on the customer satisfaction score, which we use, which is, we're using a 5-point scale rather than an NPS metric, but effectively it's the same thing. And yes, it's a key platform of what we do in the organisation. My bugbear with it's been over-incentivized and has driven unhelpful behaviours on the basis of the level of incentive. But it's definitely very, very important. Influencers, we've always been in an influencer-led industry. Okay, things have changed, but you mentioned Autocar. We've had influencers like the guys on Top Gear and the automotive magazines forever. What's changed over with the advent of social media and influencers is that the definition of a journalist has blurred into people who just and have got huge followers, and there's quite a lot of activity ensuring that that route to market is picked up on.
Perfect. Now, Andrew, I think we have a little bit of time left, and I want to throw this open to questions from the audience. Could you stage manage that for us?
We do have time. Yes, absolutely. Has anyone got any questions here for? Yes, hold on. If you can say who you are, which organisation you're with, and then ask away.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Steph Bridgman from Experienced Media Analysts. I was really curious to hear you talk about the emotions around anxiety that you're having to contend with in relation to EVs, because my assumptions perhaps is that the kinds of emotions you probably had to focus on before might have been things like happiness, pride, excitement, perhaps on the other side, anger and frustration, but perhaps not anxiety. Is this a new emotion that you're having to contend with this new category of car?
I guess it is. It's, I think there's always been a sense that buying a car is a big decision. And I think there's always, or historically, there's been a real power imbalance in going to buy a new car. It's one of the last bastions, I think, of a decision where the customer seems to lack the power. So if you think about buying almost anything else, you can go online, whether it's even a house, you can go online, see what you should be paying for it. Buying a car is always, particularly because I work in the retail part of our organisation or our industry is called the motor trade. Because when you're buying a washing machine, you don't take your old one into John Lewis and say, what will you give me for that? But buying a new car, there's the purchase of the car, what discount is a good deal, what's my trade-in worth, and this complicated finance deal, how's that being managed, and am I getting a good deal there? So there's quite a lot of moving parts. So there's always been an element of people feeling uncertain about the process and the reassurance requirements, and there's obviously reassurance around vehicle safety, yada yada yada. But yeah, I think with the as I said, the shift to EV has just brought a whole new bunch of questions into customers' minds that we need to work with the retailers and the infrastructure providers in terms of providing the sense that people can rely on this. But yeah, the sort of, as I said, range anxiety is definitely morphed into, I know my car's got the range, but when I need to charge it, are there enough chargers? Is there going to be a queue? How many of them aren't going to be working? And then, as I say, the sense that a lot of these public charging points are at the far end of a dingy car park with no lighting, and if you're a single woman, do you want to be spending 25 minutes with your car plugged into something in the dark? And that's another area where the industry really needs to respond.
I think that's fascinating, and it's led to a whole new set of behaviours. I mean, for example, we've been electric for about 6 years, but it's led to my wife sending me her location when she is alone at night charging, if she's coming back from somewhere. Completely new behaviour and that's the only time she ever does that. So I completely hear that, and I think strategies and both in terms of where they're built, where they're located, and so on and so forth, they're becoming more and more normal. Often part of a motorway service station, the rest of it. But there are those that are in industrial parks that are not the most salubrious place after dark. So I completely hear that.
Okay, and last question, I think, here.
Hi, Obina from Info Studios. I'm curious, as you're seeing, you mentioned the rise of EV war moving there. What's going to happen to, the diesel guzzlers, the petrol guzzlers, in terms of that supply? Is that just going to drop off, or we're just going to have mounds of petrol vehicles? Or how do we plan to handle that supply when the demand for it is gone?
So we're going through that process of transitioning from a whole range of vehicles powered by internal combustion engines to electric vehicles. And you're going to consistently see relatively familiar nameplates disappear. So there's no Ford Fiesta anymore. And there's no Audi TT anymore. And that will continue, that the availability of vehicles with different powertrains. So the Audi A6, that's only an EV now. It's just been relaunched. It's EV only. So it was a huge seller for us, petrol and diesel. It's an EV. So progressively, the industry is making this change. Some of it's probably more noticeable than others because, as I say, there was a Ford Fiesta, now there isn't. There was an Audi A6, now there still is, but it's an electric Audi A6. So progressively, through this decade, we're going to get to a situation where there's going to be a very limited range of internal combustion engine vehicles available by 2030.
So what I mean more is the past Ford Fiestas that have been produced in the past are just out there in the wild. What happens to them now?
So they're still there, and they'll go through the traditional life cycle. What's all the legislation, all the changes is about new vehicles. There's no ban on driving a petrol or diesel car in 2030. It's buying a new one. So those cars will go through their typical 10 to 15 year life cycle. They'll be sold as used cars for a while. So it's going to be probably well beyond 2040 before those vehicles are no longer on UK roads.
I just wanted to round up by thanking Nick so much for your time, and to say, as I would always say at the end of an episode, that if only there were more people with your approach to using data smarter, there would be rather less malarkey in the world of automotive marketing and rather more data-driven common sense. And so, again, Nick, thank you so much for joining us here today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers, Andrew.